Hello, and welcome to Choosing a Negative Strategy for Beginning Debaters. When you're on the negative in a debate, you have to be prepared to answer almost anything that the affirmative is going to say. The affirmative is likely to say a few things that we'll talk about in the things in the other tape. The affirmatives are going to say tape, but you have to answer them regardless. That's one of the things about debate. Once they start, you have to be able to respond to them. So negative strategies are ways to be able to come up with arguments that you can predict you're going to make ahead of time, so that you can go into the round prepared that if you get drawn off of your game or something, that you have arguments ready to go. Now, as the season goes on, we'll have more and more stuff that directly responds to what the affirmative cases are saying, but early on, when you can't predict it, strategy is especially important. So let's talk about 3 tips that you can use when you're making strategies that will help you to be able to keep a good grasp on debates on the negative. The first one is be realistic. Don't say that you're going to run 7 arguments or something like that. Choose a few arguments over the next few weeks next few days and next few weeks that you can look at and that you like, and get to learn them well. The second point on that is that depth of an argument is much better than knowing a little bit about a lot of arguments. If you, for example, know the China consult file inside and outside, you can run that in almost all of your debates. And you can do much better because you'll be deeper on it than your opponents. If you just have a little bit of knowledge about each thing and you try something new out, that may work to help you try stuff, but it's not necessarily the best strategy because you don't know it any better than the opponents know how to answer it. The third is make your argument something that they have to do work to answer so that they're behind on you. If you can go into the first tournament really jazzed up on a criticism, for example, say you're very good at the borders critique, which we'll talk about more in a second, then make it so that you are always a step ahead of your opponents, right? Write down and think about as you go to debates and as you're talking about it, what else this has, what weaknesses it has. Do self-evaluation of your arguments. With that being said, let's talk about a few kinds of strategies. The first type of strategy is just a very conventional strategy where you offer a disadvantage and some case arguments. Now, what you would do in this case is you would say that the affirmative doesn't necessarily solve as well as they say they're going to solve, and that their harms aren't that big. And then you would offer a disadvantage that said that doing their plan would cause something worse to happen than the harms of their plan. Now, in addition to a disadvantage, you can also offer a counterplan. A counterplan is something that says that you can do the plan better than the other side. Oftentimes, the counterplan and the disadvantage work together in what's called a net benefit. The counterplan can solve the plan that the affirmative offers without causing the disadvantage. Now, we'll talk about more about how that works in a second when we get to the China counterplan and disadvantage. But remember that counterplan and disadvantage oftentimes are part of the same strategy. A second strategy is one that I will call TKO. This strategy has you run a topicality argument, which helps you to pin down what the affirmative is saying, a critique with a relatively open-ended length that you can make apply to a lot of teams, and an impact that outweighs or impacts the case. Now, this strategy, that's the T and the K. The O is on case arguments, and these again are the arguments I was talking about that said the harms aren't there, that it's not as bad as they say it is, the solvency doesn't actually work, and things like that. Now, the next strategy that you can use is a big critique. Get to know one of the critique files very well and learn how to run it in every one of the rounds, and then you have a position that applies to almost everything. And I think that's a really good way to go about sort of getting to know it. I think that as you're making your initial negative research plan, you should sort of make circles that expand about the size of the argument, or about the argument you want to make. For example, in the first week, you may want to focus on one of the critiques, one of the counterplan and disad arguments, and a topicality file. right? In the next week, you'll want to get better on those, but expand and get to learn a few other files as well. So don't think that you have to read all 20 of these anytime soon. These are things that you can get through the season, but right now you have the choice of which ones you want to talk about. If you look in the lecture notes today, there's descriptions of each one of the arguments and I think that those will be helpful for you in the process of sort of deciding which of these draws your attention and your interest. Now, I want to talk about a few of them specifically that I think could be used really well. The first argument I want to talk about is the empire argument. This argument says that transnational capitalism is sort of the new enemy. It's no longer the state or communism or repression or things like that, but that transnational capitalism has taken all of the forces of the world and sort of put them in opposition to each other, and that when you do that, you ensure destruction of the planet through war and environmental destruction. This argument says that the way that the affirmative thinks and implements their policy through international law and through economic pressure and things like that feed into this capitalist productive system. So in these cases, you'd be arguing about the theory of whether it's a good idea to engage in things like constructive engagement, or whether or not we should have people trying to start conversations and start politics. This argument says that we can't really focus on the big political questions because those all get trapped into the sort of interactions of capitalism. But what we have to do is learn to come together as a group of people and be able to challenge the conditions that exist around us. I think this is a very good and usable position for you to learn to debate a critique on, and it is also a very good position to interact with a lot of the arguments on this year's topic. It works very well in the TKO or the one-off type of strategy, one-off criticism type of strategy. Another argument that you should be aware of is called terror talk. This argument is a criticism of people who use the term terrorism to describe people to describe a certain group of people, stereotyped, usually Islamic and Arab people. And what it says is that when you begin to use this language of terrorism in order to describe certain political acts that people might engage in, ultimately what you do is you make it so that the people who hear that discussion of it are more willing to let bad things happen to people. Like, think about this. If somebody says, is it okay to torture somebody? Most people are going to say no. However, if you ask the question, is it okay to torture a terrorist? A lot more people will say yes. Simply calling somebody that creates the possibility that others will create violence against them, and this argument criticizes that. The consult China counterplan is a counterplan and disadvantage strategy. The counterplan says that the United States, before doing anything with any of the countries in the resolution, should ask China how they feel about the plan. If China says yes, it will go through. If they say no, then the plan will be revised and it will stop. The disadvantage says that not doing that angers China, and that there's likely to be a war, or there's likely to be a downturn in U.S.-China relations, which are important to a lot of things. This is a good file to get to learn how a disad and a counterplan work, and we'll talk more specifically about each of these arguments as the weeks go on. Thank you.